Have you ever been in, a learning situation, maybe a lecture, it could be a long meeting, or even just trying to read something complex, and the information just sort of washes over you, and you're left thinking, gosh, there has to be a better way to actually get this, to make it stick. What if learning wasn't like this constant struggle? What if it felt faster, more intuitive, where you become the driver of your own understanding? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into an educational model that suggests exactly that. It's called the Taxshila Teachers Model.
Mm.
And this isn't just about tweaking things here and there. It's a pretty fundamental reimagining of how we learn. The idea is that students themselves become these small teachers, taking the lead in their own learning and crucially transferring that knowledge.
Yeah, and our mission here today is really to unpack how this model flips conventional thinking on its head. It redefines student roles, even teacher roles. We'll get into how it's maybe surprisingly grounded in neuroscience. And I mean, it has some really ambitious goals for speeding up learning and empowering students. It's quite something.
Right. And our guide for this conversation, it's excerpts from a pretty new piece, Universal Learning Transfer, Scaling the Model of Taxshila Teachers, just published June 13th, 2025, by Shivanar and Taxshila Page. So this deep dive is really for you, our listener, to pull out the most impactful ideas from this groundbreaking research. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's unpack this. The source argues that, standard education, lectures, rote memorization, always depending on the teacher. It kind of misses the mark on how our brains actually learn best. So what are the big educational problems this Taxshila model is trying to fix?
Well, it really points to a few key things, like student disengagement, right? We've all seen that. Knowledge just evaporating after the test, uneven participation, some kids fly, others get left behind, and just how long it takes to actually develop usable skills. Traditional teaching is mostly about, well, instructing. It often fails at effective knowledge transfer, making knowledge stick and be useful, especially for today's world.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The core idea, the big innovation, is these Taxshila teachers. These are students, high-performing ones who get pre-trained, and they become the engine for knowledge transfer in the classroom. It's not just like group work. The source actually calls it a fundamental reorganization of how knowledge gets internalized. Really deep stuff.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the whole approach is rooted in what the author calls learnography,
Hmm.
which is essentially the science of how we learn best, how knowledge actually transfers and stays with us. It taps right into the neurobiology of learning, specifically trying to activate the brain's motor circuits, the memory systems, through peer-led sharing and this concept called brainpage theory.
Okay, brain page theory. Let's dig into that in motor science. What exactly is a brain page? How does this theory say we, encode knowledge directly into our brain circuits by practicing tasks, solving problems? And where does motor science fit in? How does doing stuff, motor activity, speed up this brain page thing and make learning deeper?
Right, think of a brain page as like a really integrated blueprint for knowledge. It's not just remembering a fact. It's more like having a complex program coded directly into your brain's hardware, ready to run.
Yeah.
It lets you do things with the knowledge. And the process heavily involves parts of the brain like the motor cortex, the basal ganglia, the cerebellum. These are the bits involved in movement, habits, coordinating actions. So when you actually do something, rehearse a task, solve a problem hands-on, those motor circuits fire up. And that strengthens the neural pathways for that knowledge way more effectively than just, listening or reading about it.
Oh.
And this has knock-on effects in the classroom too, like way less need for traditional homework, less need for constant verbal instruction from the teacher.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Okay, next pillar, miniature schools. The source describes these as small collaborative peer groups led by one of these Taxshila teachers. How do these little units change the classroom? How do they foster leadership, responsibility, even peer correction?
Well, it's a fundamental shift. Students become or start becoming autonomous learners. They're not just waiting for the teacher, they become active leaders and collaborators within their own small group. It creates this ecosystem, you could say. Leadership working together, but also individual accountability. Learning becomes this shared sort of self-regulating thing rather than just top-down instructions.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so who are these small teachers exactly? The source is clear. It says they're not defined by age or certification, but by learning achievement and leadership.
Mhm.
It also mentions their 5 merits. What are those, and what do they tell us about the kind of students this model wants to create?
Right, the 5 merits. They basically outline the core skills these students develop. So they're small teachers, meaning good at transferring knowledge. They're trained warriors, which points to problem solving, critical thinking. They gain professional skills for the real world. Quality coding, which sounds techy, but here it means precisely internalizing and applying complex info. And ultimately, they become part of a smart workforce. What's really key is that these pre-trained students aren't just helpers. They're equipped to lead, to actively activate learning circuits in their peers, as the source puts it. They become confident facilitators. They really master making these brain pages and using the knowledge modules.
Okay, so if students are stepping up like this, taking on these big roles, what happens to the traditional teachers? How does their job change? They go from being the main instructors to, what was it, learnography facilitators,
Mhm.
assessing these brain page modules, guiding the Taxshila teachers?
Yeah, their role shifts significantly. They become assessors of learning outcomes, maybe
Mm-hmm.
task moderators.
Mm.
They're not the primary source of information delivery anymore. They're more like the architects of the learning environment. They support the Taxshila teachers, make sure the system's running smoothly. It means much less reliance on that constant direct instruction model.
And the ultimate goal, the big vision, is universal learning transfer. That sounds ambitious. What does that actually mean? And how does this Taxshila model supposedly make it possible to apply knowledge seamlessly across subjects, grades, even cultures?
Universal learning transfer? Yeah, it's a big idea. It means knowledge isn't just learned in isolation for a test. It becomes truly usable, applicable, transferable to different situations, different problems. And the model proposes this really startling goal: finishing all of foundational through advanced education, so kindergarten right through a master's level by age 20, making students genuinely ready for professional life that young. The underlying belief is that if learning is truly autonomous, structured, and based on how the brain works, then constant teaching in the old sense just isn't as necessary.
Wow, K through masters by 20. That's incredibly fast. What are the potential roadblocks or maybe criticisms? Does the source talk about how that kind of acceleration is actually feasible without, burning kids out or sacrificing depth?
That's a fair question.
Hmm.
The source mostly argues feasibility based on its scientific grounding. The idea is that current systems are incredibly inefficient. They underuse the brain's natural learning power. By aligning with neurobiology, the motor circuits, the process becomes radically more efficient. So the argument isn't that kids are being pushed beyond capacity, but that their actual capacity is finally being unlocked. The challenges mentioned are more about the systemic change needed. Retraining teachers, redesigning materials, getting societal buy-in. It's a big overhaul, not just a tweak.
Okay, so beyond that really ambitious timeline, what other benefits does the source point to? What are the key findings from implementing this Taxshila model?
Well, there are quite a few. A major one is obviously enhancing that peer-to-peer knowledge transfer, which directly leads to better retention, better performance. It clearly fosters leadership skills, responsibility in students. That comes up again and again. And because it relies on motor science, it drives truly active learning, which seems to reduce classroom stress, even disruption. It empowers kids to be self-directed learners. And this is important. It suggests it can help reduce achievement gaps because the learning process itself becomes more universally effective. Oh, and it seems to be scalable.
That's quite a list. And you mentioned reducing classroom stress. That brings up the social side. How does creating this deep peer respect within the miniature schools affect the overall classroom atmosphere? Does it touch on things like bullying?
Yes, definitely. The idea is that when students are actively teaching and learning from each other, collaborating in these small, focused groups, they develop a genuine respect for their peers' abilities and their contributions. It's built into the process. And this shared sense of purpose and mutual value can, the source suggests, significantly minimize negative social dynamics like bullying. It fosters a more inclusive, more emotionally balanced environment for everyone.
That's a powerful potential side effect. So, okay, if this model has all these potential benefits, how do you actually scale something so different? How do you take it beyond a pilot program to schools, districts, maybe even whole countries? What are the practical steps the source lays out?
It provides a pretty clear roadmap. First, obviously, setting up these miniature schools. Then, implementing robust pre-training programs for the students who have become Taxshila teachers. That's critical. Then there's classroom design and technology integration. But then this key technology is there to assist the motor and cognitive engagement, not replace it. It's a tool, not the focus. A huge piece is teacher transformation, retraining educators for their new facilitator role, and aligning the curriculum using transfer books, these modular materials designed specifically for making those brain pages. The call to action sums it up. Adopt the brain page system, train the small teachers, create miniature schools, transform the educators, use modular books, aim to finish learning by 20, and importantly, share the vision widely. It's presented as a coherent, step-by-step system change.
So to wrap up, the Taxshila model is positioned as maybe a neurological upgrade for education, empowering students to lead, learn differently, and really transform their own journey through school and beyond. It offers this detailed blueprint for creating high-performance learning environments that are supposedly much more in sync with how our brains actually work.
Exactly. And maybe the thought to leave with is this. Imagine a world where every classroom, using this kind of brain-based system, really does become a launch pad for genius, where students aren't just, passive recipients, but they're the active creators and leaders of knowledge. And they achieve this deep mastery, this readiness by age 20. What might that future of learning really look like for you, maybe for your kids, for the next generation? It's a compelling picture.
Definitely food for thought. We really encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring these ideas. Think about how they might connect to your own learning or the education systems you're part of. It seems like the conversation about how we learn best is definitely heating up.